Good morning, everyone. Today I have the great pleasure of introducing yet another amazing alumna from Wellesley College. Rajul Pandya-Lorch graduated from Wellesley in 1985 with a degree in economics and also holds a master's degree in public and international affairs from Princeton University. She is currently the Chief of Staff for the Director General of the International Food Policy Research Initiative and also head of the International Food Policy Research Initiative's 2020 vision for food, agriculture, and the environmental initiative. In this position, Rajul has facilitated 4 international conferences on the topic of food security. Rajul has stayed in close contact with our college even upon graduating. She was a part of the inaugural Albright Institute 2 years ago and continues to work with Professor Robert Parlberg of the Political Science Department on various food policy issues. Additionally, she had the privilege of welcoming Hillary Clinton to the International Food Policy Research Institute to give a major speech on famine and food security. Having had the privilege to interview Rajul this morning, I can attest to the fact that she is an extremely knowledgeable person and everyone should be very excited for her presentation today. Please join me in welcoming Rajul.
Cassandra, thank you very much. I hope my thing is on. It's a pleasure to be back here at Wellesley and a pleasure to be back here at the Albright Institute. I was very lucky to take part in the yes, it's on. I was very lucky to take part in the inaugural session 2 years ago, together with one of my favorite persons in the world, Rob Parlberg. I have learned so much from him over the years, and I continue to learn from him every time I work with him. I should also say that this presentation was prepared by my colleague, Zhenya Karelina, who is class of 2010. And she works with me as a research assistant and continues to keep the Wellesley flag alive in this world of international food, agriculture, public policy. It is by coincidence that she came to work with us. I hope in the future we will have more such coincidences. But thank you very much. What I wanted to do is to share with you where I think the opportunities for global food and nutrition security are. And I do not know, somebody mentioned paradigm shift, but I would say that this is a golden moment we have that we've not had for many, many years, where we are basically able to have agriculture, food security, nutrition on the agenda, global agenda today, in a confluence that we should take advantage of. What I would normally like to do is take questions as I go along. This time I'm going to try and resist that simply because I have 2 videos. And I want you to have a look at the videos and then have a conversation. But again, if you feel burning questions, comments, clarification, don't hesitate, just jump in. I see this more as an informal dialogue between us. Just to get the stage right before we talk about the trends in food security and some of the key issues, common understanding what is food security. To my recollection, there are about 300 definitions of food security around. This is the one that is the most commonly accepted. And here I would like you to focus. Let me read it around quickly and then tell you what I would like you to focus on, or what you may want to focus on rather. Commonly, food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. All times is one of the critical aspects over here, because it's not, many people have access to food at certain times in the year, and the seasonality aspects here. Another important dimension that has come more prominently to the forefront is the safe and nutritious food. We for a long time tended to think about food security as sufficient food, but more and more it is not just the quantity of food, but the quality of food. And then dietary needs. Dietary needs vary for different people at different stages in their lives and for genders. So it's also important to keep that factor in mind. This sort of illustrates more what I think about the different dimensions of food security. Food security is the availability of food plus the access to the food, because having food available does not mean that everyone has access to the food. It is being able to utilize that food. You can have access to the food, but how your body utilizes it brings in the nutrition dimension. And stability, which means which erases seasonality aspects that I'd mentioned earlier, having at different times. So food security, to have food security, all these 4 dimensions have to come into play. Nutrition is a very important dimension of food security. And there's more and more attention, thank goodness, to malnutrition or hidden hunger, or in this instance, it is undernutrition or hidden hunger, which is basically imbalance of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. There is a lot more research out available now than there ever was before about the consequences of malnutrition, and that basically malnutrition in very young children will have permanent, lifelong effects in terms of increasing the risk to chronic disease and mortality, and in decreasing economic productivity. I don't know how many of you have heard about 1,000 days. Hillary Clinton is a champion for that. And this is basically the recognition that the window of opportunity is in the first 1,000 days of a child's life, the 9 months of conception and the first 2 years of a child. Basically, if you miss improving the nutrition of a child at that time, you've basically missed it for the rest of the life. That everything else is catching up rather than making fundamental changes. And this means that it is not just the child, but it is the pregnant mother, investing in the nutrition of the pregnant mother. But it is not enough to come in, as more and more research is showing, it's not enough to come in at the time when women are pregnant. Many times it is only when they're in the 4th or the 5th month of their pregnancy. It is important to catch the young girls and educate them, improve their capacity to bear children well before they even become pregnant. So you can see the tracing back. But the window of opportunity, there's recognition, it is 1,000 days. So where are we? Very quick, I give you a quick flavor where we are with hunger and nutrition trends. Most of you probably know this already, but basically, and there is a lot of controversy about how these numbers are collected, measured, tracked, etc. And there's a lot of not upsetness, a lot of anger that it takes so long to get real data out there. So we are actually looking at information that is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years out of time and making decisions basically on inadequate data. But anyway, given the data that we have, there's a basic recognition that we are around 925 million people hungry, that we have basically made very little reduction, as you will see from that side of the slide. We've made basically very little reduction in hunger over the last 20 years or so, and we actually saw a major blip in recent years connected to the world food price crises, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Where are the hungry people? Asia, primarily South Asia, primarily India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And let me make one mention over here. The one and only country in the world that has made a very major reduction in hunger is China. The one and only country of hundreds of millions of people. Everybody else has basically stagnated or has made little, has made some but little. South Asia is a hotspot, as is Africa. Hunger is growing in Africa, hunger is stagnating in South Asia. We have a global hunger index at IFPRI, and which every year sort of has 3 components: the proportion of undernourished people, the prevalence of underweight children, and the under 5 mortality rate. There are flaws to this method, as there are flaws to every index you will find out there, but this allows us one way of tracking and one way of monitoring the level of hunger, the situation. This index tells us that we have 26 countries that have an alarming or a serious 1 degree lower situation vis-a-vis hunger. And you will see, if you look at the red color and the orange color, which are the alarming and the serious, primarily Africa, primarily South Asia. This reiterates again that Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are the hotspots of child undernutrition. You will see China doesn't show up by and large over here. Of course, there are problems in China, but in terms of the reduction that has been made, it is very notable. Hidden hunger, which is basically micronutrient and vitamin, insufficient intake of vitamins and micronutrients, very prevalent too, primarily, again, Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. The key micronutrient deficiencies are iron deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, iodine deficiency. And you will see again that what I would like to draw your attention here to is the 90% of girls suffering from iron deficiency in South Asia, 44% of the children in vitamin A, and iodine deficiency. These have disease elements associated with them. So it's not just, oh, I'm missing this. There are cognitive, there are chronic disease issues associated with these. and the coexistence of undernutrition and overnutrition, as you see in developing countries, but what you're finding more and more in the same households in many developing countries. There are not many good indicators and data collected for obesity in developing countries. You're beginning to see that. That's why you'll see there's some gaps, a lot of gaps over here. But this figure allows you to see several different things. That overnutrition does predominate in the high-income countries, but developing countries are not lagging behind the low and the middle-income countries. And there you have a public health dilemma coming up. How do you tackle both obesity and undernutrition in the same household? So I come now to the second part of my presentation. Global food security challenges are very large. They come in from many different aspects, many different angles, coming from demographic challenges, income and population growth, but also urbanization. Let me mention economic growth for one moment. China has experienced very major economic growth. India is beginning to catch up. Brazil, major economic growth. You see changes in diets associated with that. And you see increased consumption of meat products. Increased consumption of meat products has health issues, but also puts a lot more pressure on the agricultural systems, because you're not just producing staple crops, maize, rice, wheat for people to consume. You are producing more and more of that for animals to consume. And then you have a new factor coming in, which is the energy, the demand for energy, the growing demand for energy, and turning the attention to agriculture as a source for energy is also putting a lot more pressure on the agricultural sector. The underinvestment in agriculture and rural development that has taken place over the last 20 to 30 years, actually. Let me just see if I remove, yeah. This morning, in a moment of madness, I removed some slides. I thought I had too long a presentation, but I had a set of slides on the world food price spikes. Let me just describe that for you for a moment. The last 4 years, we have seen two major price spikes in the world in terms of commodities. By that, I mean a very rapid escalation in prices. You may remember it from 2007, 2008, because it also affected the food that we buy here in the US, not just the food that people buy in Thailand or China or India or Africa. You saw a very rapid rise in prices that was driven by several things. It was driven by a change in the demand for agricultural products, coming from income growth, coming from demographic, coming from a major new player entering, which is the energy sector. As the energy demand for bioenergy went up, they basically diverted certain large portion of, not a large, but a growing portion, which has actually now become 1/3 of the US corn crop, into bioenergy, away from food for people and animals. And you saw a lot more, because of the financial crisis, you saw a lot more hot money looking for places to park. And they went into the commodity markets. They went into the Chicago Board of Trade. They went into commodity exchanges around the world looking for somewhere to invest and park that money. You saw a lot more speculation in every commodity market, but it spilled over and affected the food markets. You saw countries taking ways to protect their people. You saw a lot more import barriers go up, a lot more export barriers go up. Countries not wanting to export their products and save it for their people. You saw a lot more individual countries acting with global bad consequences. You know, you protect yourself, but then your neighbor who was looking at you to get you his or her, or rather that country's rice or import, suddenly got lost, completely left out of the market. And it spilled over into everybody's consumption. What happened was that wages did not go up, incomes did not go up. Many people, many poor people in developing countries, half of their income to 3/4 of their income goes into buying food, suddenly were really hit hard. And that's where you saw this major spike of 100 million more people going hungry. What happened was you had consequences for nutrition, and these are the lifelong consequences you will see in the generation to come, is that many people spent their money in more calorie-dense food that is cheaper than more nutrient-dense food that is more expensive, fruits and vegetables. So they use their limited amount of money to still buy food of lower quality. What you saw was many people basically taking the children out of school, selling off their livestock to be able to get income. Lifelong consequences also, because you lose assets. And then you have to go back and buy that asset at a higher price. So what prices went down, and again this year in 2011 we have seen prices go up again. We are living in a world of more volatile food prices. We are living in a world where there is much more attention now to agriculture, which is a good thing, but there is a lot more demand on agriculture for non-food purposes. And over the coming decades, the question for us is how do we shift how agriculture responds to these different threats and different opportunities? Because it's not a threat, is an opportunity also. So how do you respond? So the global food security situation is in a state of flux. Then I will bring one more player, what is happening. Nutrition is now finally on the global development agenda as more and more people realize the consequences of malnutrition. As more and more people realize that countries are having to spend, developing countries are having to allocate more of their resources to public health to cope with the consequences of malnutrition in earlier. That how do you find ways to make agriculture more nutrition and health friendly? That is something I'll talk in the last part of my presentation, but that is something that is also now coming onto the global agenda. I am excited. Yes, there are threats out there. Yes, we are living in this world, but I'm excited because I think we are literally seeing a paradigm shift here. We are seeing a moment to transform the way we think of agriculture, the way we invest in agriculture, the way we can use agriculture. Agriculture is a means towards the end of better health, better nutrition, better well-being. But I think we have finally, actually after many years, seen that golden moment. Can we capture it? I pray to God we can. But I just wanted to lay that context for you because I do see these opportunities for leveraging. I mentioned now that food security and agriculture must remain high on the global agenda. I'd like to share with you something I shared at the last Albright lecture I gave, which is work from a project I call Millions Fed. Everybody has the perception that agriculture is a gloom and doom sector and we are not making progress. And we wanted to see what can we learn, are there successes out there, and what can we learn from them as we want to think about reinvesting in agriculture. How do we redesign the way we invest in agriculture? What can we learn to get more bang for the buck, to have more people escape? Several things to bring to your attention, but the first one is 1 billion people were going hungry 50 years ago. 1 billion people are going hungry today. We can sit there and get extremely depressed. My God, in 50 years we've not made any progress. In 50 years we've added about 4 billion people to the world. We have made progress. Okay? We have a long way to go, but we have made progress. So, where have we made progress? What works? Where are the successes? What are the key lessons? Here I would like to show you a 1-minute video showing some of the key lessons. I hope technologically this works. If it doesn't, somebody is going to have to help me.
Imagine a world without hunger, without poverty. It can be done. A world with many challenges, each in its own time and place. With countless groups of people, all bound by food insecurity, comes a diverse collection of success stories of triumph over hunger and poverty. An array of success stories from all over the world, gathered and scientifically assessed. The impacts are millions fed, globally, regionally, and nationally. Farmers, scientists, civil
we found 20 successes, large-scale successes that led to millions of people. There are many hundreds and thousands and millions of small-scale successes. Pilots here, village there, urban slum there, etc. One of the big challenges we will have in the years to come is how do we scale up successes? How do we scale them up? How do you go beyond the small? But coming back to this project, I would like to tell you we found successes all over the world, not just in quote-unquote Asia, which is what people thought they would be. We found successes ranging in a number of different commodities. We found many different pathways to success, and I will highlight 6 of these here for you. Success was not simply intensifying staple food production, not just growing the pile of food. Very major component of success. And this was in the early 1950s, beginning then when the investments were made in agricultural development, agricultural R&D. To how do you increase the yield? How do you use the natural resources, the water, the land more intensively, better? But over the 1960s, 70s, more and more attention went towards natural resources, environmental, and recognizing that it is not simply enough to produce more food. How do you raise incomes? How do you make it more viable for communities and people to engage in the agricultural production in more sustainable ways? Growing recognition 70s and 80s that markets are an integral element of successfully transforming communities to effectively engage in markets. You cannot simply produce food, sit there and wait for it to be sold. How do you expand the role of markets? What type of infrastructure do you need to have? How do you equip your farmers to more effectively engage in what is called the value chain, the transportation, the regulatory, the legal frameworks, but essentially how to engage in the markets is a critical element of transformation of the agricultural sector. The recognition that we've been focusing so much of our energy and attention on cereals, very rightly, because staples are the major first base of people's diets and where you're going to get the calorie-dense foods. But it's not enough to simply focus on that. How do you diversify? A lot of very exciting projects moving into the livestock, investing in livestock, investing in dairy, the milk scheme of India, investing in fish, the tilapia in the Philippines, fruits and vegetables, mung beans, legumes, etc. The recognition that agriculture is part of a larger economy and that what happens outside of agriculture may have more impact on agriculture than what happens in agriculture. What you do with your monetary policies, what you do with your trade policies, what you do with the policies in terms of rural, non-farm growth, etc. But basically, the importance of reforming economy-wide policies came into the picture. And then the last one I'd like to mention is the recognition that it's not just quantity of food. It is how do you improve the food quality and human nutrition. There, I will tell you, we found only one project, and that was the homestead food production in Bangladesh. And I'll talk about that in a moment. That, to me, is an area where there is a potential to make much more of an impact in the future. So I give you 2 examples. I had mentioned this as one of the 2 readings I'd suggested. Everything is up on the website, IFPRI website. I encourage you, if you're interested, to know the gory details. Actually, they're exciting details about these 20 successes. Go and find them. There is a whole suite of products here. This is just the booklet, but there are many things. I share with you 2 things. I mentioned China at the beginning of my talk. It's the one and only country that has made a very major reduction. This is to me, the story here is the land tenure reform of China. And this is a story of the late 1970s and the early 1980s when there was a fundamental shift in China and the way in which it was looking at agriculture. And these policy reforms, beginning with a small community, expanding out to a state, province, and across China, in 6 years, introduced household farming and reintroduced household farming, made it possible for households to engage in farming, returned more than 95% of the farmland to 160 million rural households away from collective agriculture to household farming. Immediate impact. This is just a small flavor of 6 years. In this 6 years, 78 to 84, you saw a 1/3 increase in grain production, 34%. you saw a doubling, more than a doubling of rural incomes, and you saw a reduction in rural poverty of 22%, which is a very, very large reduction in poverty. That success continued and basically sowed the seeds for China's industrial revolution. This agricultural revolution led to an industrial revolution, what you see of China today. Did I see one hand there? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready. By returning, you mean farms that they were already theirs?
No, farms that had basically been collectivized.
Okay.
Yeah. The second one I want to mention is what I talked about, the homestead food production in Bangladesh. A very unique project that has now actually gone beyond Bangladesh into Africa and into other parts of Southeast Asia. This is led by the Helen Keller International with many partners locally in whichever countries they're operating in. This project basically was started up by recognizing the micronutrient deficiencies, the poor diet qualities, but also that many women are engaged in these activities. And how do you effectively engage women better to have more welfare outcomes in agriculture? It started out with home gardens of micronutrient-rich vegetables and diversified into small livestock production, poultry particularly, and also into nutrition education. So it is again a project with complementarities. I'm not sitting here advertising a particular project. I'm sitting here standing here, not sitting, here to basically convey sort of a project that began with a pilot where you learn from this, and the issues here are basically how do you have homestead food garden scaled up, not just with one community. This is the scaling up that is the thing to learn from this particular example. But again, to basically had an impact on 5 million people in Bangladesh. We came across many different successes that do not have evidence. That is one of the points I'd like to make forward. It is so important that we invest in evidence, invest in data collecting. We cannot learn if we do not have rigorous assessments of what actually happened and what were the outcomes. We cannot credibly share the lessons if we do not have that body of knowledge of what worked and what didn't work. And for us, there were so many people who wanted so many of their successes included here, and we had to turn away from a body of 300 nominations. We ended up with only 20. There was not enough evidence out there to say something works. It's not enough for you and me to tell somebody it works. You have to have evidence if you want to make an impact in terms of multiplying, replicating, spreading on, and scaling up. Why did it work? I'll make 4 points. We identified 8 things. Read the report for more, but I'll make mention of 4 of them. For agriculture, you need science and technology. You need R&D. You need to keep that pipeline full. For many poor people, the agricultural science has to come basically from the public sector. Private sector is a business. They have to engage in profit making. It is natural. But many poor people's crops are not profit making. You need public sector for that, but you need private sector also for the incentives to be able to make the connections to the markets. There is a collaborative relationship here that in many success stories we have. Common feature was collaboration. Common feature was the private incentives. Common feature was the complementary investments, rural roads, extension services, education programs, and the like. You know, that it's not enough to simply quote unquote have R&D. You need to be able to have infrastructure in place that basically takes advantage and multiplies the impact of the R&D. And the last one, leadership and dedication. Every success story essentially had leaders, champions. They are not necessarily a president of X or a minister of Y and Z. Extremely, one of the most powerful stories here is the regreening of the Sahel. That is a story driven by farmers who went from community to community and shared their experiences with other farmers. Extremely powerful way of learning and learning from your peers. An extremely powerful way of learning how to manage risk. Agriculture is a risky business. And one of the major constraints that holds back people from scaling up their investment in agriculture is the risk, because they can stand to lose everything if they make the wrong decision or the wrong investment at the wrong time. You need to have communities together that are able to help each other cope with this risk. Let me turn to the second part, my last part of my presentation. I will wrap up in about 5 minutes. Is basically this past year, agriculture, nutrition, and health nexus has come to the forefront. The recognition that agriculture and nutrition and health are intertwined. That what you do with agriculture has impact on nutrition, and nutrition feeds back and impacts on agriculture through productivity, through people's well-being, and the like. What I would like to do here is very quickly share with you in a short video the highlights of a conference that I organized last year in January, and that is why, Joanne, I was not here. And I had Rob Paulberg and others at this conference in New Delhi that brought together 1,000 people to talk about how can we leverage agriculture better for nutrition and health. Yes, it's an advertisement, but you'll only see me there for 1 second. What I want you to, this video has 3 parts to it. Why should we be thinking about linking agriculture, nutrition, and health? And how can we do that? These voices are much more effective, more powerful than I am. And then after this video, I will just basically wrap up with where do we go from here. I hope you enjoy this video. It was such an exciting 3 days, but I think it makes the case. We really have a golden moment to leverage agriculture and achieve our other goals of nutrition and health. Nearly 1,000 participants from more than 65 countries, representing all areas of agriculture, nutrition, and health.
Malnutrition is not only a consequence of poverty, it is also a cause of poverty.
There are no laws indeed that food might fix.
Nutrition is the natural bridge, let me say, between agriculture and health.
If we don't actually look at the broader forces at work, we will not achieve the desired improvements in reducing hunger.
We have, I think, a poor understanding of what we want to ask the agricultural sector from the health point of view or from the nutrition point of view.
We need to answer these questions. Are we growing the right foods? Are we growing them in the most efficient way with respect to inputs, water, and land? Are we growing them in the most sustainable way?
It's not enough for us to just increase the quantity of food available to the world's most vulnerable. We must also improve the quality of their diets by ensuring they have access to diverse and nutritious foods.
How do we get people to demand tasty foods that they can afford and that are accessible? I think we'll continue to be unsuccessful in some of the new challenges. I think you need an enabling policy environment, but I think we have to collectively do more than that.
In other words, a cross-disciplinary solution to a cross-disciplinary problem, not a siloed solution. It needs health specialists, educationists, social scientists, agronomists, on and on and on.
Universities train tomorrow's developing professionals. We can and should begin now to incorporate elements of agriculture, nutrition, and health training into that education.
If we could really actually plan programs and projects so that we explicitly include nutrition objectives right from the beginning when these projects are being designed, then that's the way we will get impact.
Research efforts have made it possible to biofortify some crops for better nutrition outcomes.
Business has tremendous and mostly untapped potential to contribute to improving food security, agriculture, nutrition, and also health.
And to start improving the food conditions of rural communities is only fitting if done with participatory manner and well attention to socio-cultural issues of local communities.
There's an enormous amount of effort that needs to be made in better data systems. Household level data, panel data, district level data, etc.
What we need actually are some really good impact evaluations which show that if you invest in nutrition, you also get better nutrition and health outcomes.
And we need champions who have got passion. People who actually have a passion to make that difference.
Firstly, making sense of the links and incorporating those links into our work. Secondly, getting the right policies. Third, engaging stakeholders and getting them to work in transformative ways. Fourthly, focusing on action and measuring results. And fifth, communicating and telling the story.
We need to invest in agriculture and in the complementary types of investments in other sectors that will bring about improvements in nutrition.
In order to grow more, you have to give incentives to farmers to go into production.
The partnerships, communication, and mutual accountability can create incentives for working together.
A crisis of this magnitude will be solved only through an intensive global effort that brings together governments, the private sector, NGOs, scientists, and citizens.
The synergy between agriculture, health, and nutrition is, in my view, a missing link in many of the cases where, in spite of numerous government efforts, we are not able to achieve the targets because those linkages which are necessary are missing.
We have a tremendous momentum, and by we I'm talking about the community under the leadership of IFPRI and a number of development organizations who are into this as well. We must not lose this momentum, and that means that while we are doing research, filling knowledge gaps, improving the data, we must also promote action.
How do we go forward? 4 parts of our way forward plan. We need better knowledge. We need to fill the knowledge gap. Second bullet, we need to invest in the research, evaluation, education systems that are cross-sectoral. We need to do no harm, even as we are looking for ways to move forward. Second bullet, design health and nutrition interventions that contribute to the productivity of agricultural labor. We need to seek out and scale up innovative solutions, and I highlight the third bullet. We have an incredible opportunity to incorporate nutrition into the value chains for food production. And finally, create an environment in which cooperation can thrive. And I highlight the last bullet here, communication and advocacy to bring about change. We may recognize this, the rest of the world doesn't. We need to find ways to bring others into this fold. To sum up, I hope in this last, whatever, 40 minutes or so, I was able to give you a flavor of where we are with the state of food and nutrition security in the world. A lot of progress has been made, but 1 billion people still going hungry, and about 2 billion people still nutritionally insecure, precarious situation. We do have persistent hunger. More importantly, we have growing global stresses, and that require different forms of action. We have a role to play, different players in different ways. And finally, we do need innovative approaches, and I do think we need to rethink the way we look at agriculture, we look at nutrition, and we look at health, and find ways to have some synergies that will have multiplier effects. Thank you very much. How do you want me to do this? Shall I just respond to questions? I'm happy to do that. Okay. Shall we go with the first row? Yeah. The lady in the white. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rajul, for coming to Wellesley, coming to the Institute and speak with us. You mentioned the story of China, and what the story in which I found most compelling is that China in the 1970s, their GDP is almost equivalent as many countries in Africa. And you've both mentioned its effort in terms of policy that has diminished its poverty by a huge scale. So to what extent that kind of policy can be perhaps implemented in Africa, perhaps implemented in Southeast Asia? And the second question is that you mentioned funding as a major issue, both the negative sense of funding, in which speculations occur in terms of commodity market. On the other hand, there's a huge need for funding in private sector and particularly in science and technology. So in what extent can we attempt to transfer this negative sense of funding into a more positive use of it? And to what extent can the government regulate the commodity market such that it can be more efficient, prevent unnecessary speculation to happen, as we know that our market right now is rampant with corruption that's occurring in Wall Street that has put us into recession that we're experiencing right now.
Thank you both. 2 very good questions. I'm not sure I'll be able to address the second one as well as I would want to myself. Let me take the first one, China, and how transferable are the policies, or how can other African countries, Southeast Asia. China is very unique in that it has the capacity, in a sense, to, given the governance regime that it has the capacity to experiment on a large scale or a small scale and make it larger scale. And it has the capacity to make some very major policy decisions and have them essentially enforced. Many African countries don't have that same governance capacity. And many African countries, or many other countries, regardless of where they are in the world, will not have those capacities where its population is able to, is not only able to, is more having to accept that. Leave aside the explicit policy of China. I think one needs to learn more from some of the features of the Chinese work. And some of those features are, again, experimentation is an element there in terms of how can we invest in experimenting with different policy options. More importantly is how can we actually invest. China invested in major ways. When China decides on something, it went in. We don't see that same degree of dedication in terms of investment and putting government resources into things. So the larger message I would want to take away from that is, if we are serious, and I am an African, I'm from Kenya, as many of you may know, so I can actually say this without sounding preachy too much. As an African, I wish that my African governments or my country would spend more of its own resources on what it considers important to its population in terms of agriculture, rural development, because these are large countries with large agriculture and rural, instead of investing, quote unquote, in defense or in other expenditures. So I think that is one of the larger takeaway messages I would get. If you're serious about this, invest your own resources. Second takeaway message I would take is also stick to your for a certain number of years. Stick to those policies. Don't just change every year, something or the other, driven by the fashion of donor X and Y. Second part of your question was the funding and the speculation and so forth. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that many people know the answer to that, but I think there are a lot of people are grappling with that, of basically how do you manage speculation. But more importantly is actually how do you recognize speculation? Even before you can do something about it, what are some of the tools for recognizing? And the related question is basically the investment, how do you scale up investment? I think at the end of the day, people will want to invest in something, companies will want to invest, countries will want to invest when they see a payoff. And how do you make it attractive for payoffs to emerge and not be seen as sectors that are kind of money down a rat hole? So a lot of it also comes back to being able to communicate the impact of the investments that you make. This is I don't like the word aid very much, because it is essentially investment. You are either going to invest in helping people escape poverty, but it's not charity. I think we have to also change the lexicon. I know there were a lot of hands. I don't want to do injustice to other people. Do you want to pass the mic along to the person next not to those 2 seats away? Yeah.
This is kind of off of your response to her question, but you were trying to motivate countries, especially in Africa, to use their own resources to work on these problems. How do you think us as individuals or as governments outside of the country can work on influencing the government to actually do that?
I think it is very dangerous to sit from outside the country and influence, because unless it is owned by those people, it will always be seen as an external, and that is a kiss of death in the long term. So where I would take a step back is basically the importance of education. And I would love everybody to come to Wellesley, but I think more is importance of education, importance of having critical masses, importance of having voices, importance of having forums for voices to be raised. And by that I also mean communication channels, media, community spaces and the like. But as you have space for more people to be able to articulate, and that is heard inside and acted upon inside, is the only way it will be actually sustainable. If it is owned from outside, it won't go anywhere in the long term. Shall we go to the second row and pass the mic back the second row? I will walk this way. Yeah.
What would you like to see implemented in order to have greater collaboration between the private and public sectors, between different governments? What strategies do you think are best to pursue this goal?
2, 3, 4 years, you've seen again a shift in the private sector's engagement in agriculture. There is a very interesting group at the World Economic Forum called the New Vision for Agriculture, which is about 25 of the major companies coming together and have put together what they call a roadmap for action. I think one of the key things is breaking down this barrier of mistrust between public and private sectors. 2 will be for the private sector to feel it is a public sector environment, legal frameworks that are clear or transparent, or regulatory frameworks that are clear or transparent. When you don't have that clarity, then there's no desire to actually invest. Most importantly, I would say, it is not going to happen by saying it is going to happen. Both or multi-parties have to see, every party in that quote-unquote collaboration has to see something of value to it. If they don't see something of value to each of that group, then it is basically a charitable thingy that doesn't go anywhere in the long term. So there has to be space for solutions to emerge. So you see some interesting things on the technology side, with Monsanto basically giving away some of its technologies, quote unquote, in biotech, because they don't see anything of profit for them to engage in, but then they're able to work with others to transfer the technology. But there you again need some mediators or brokers. But again, at the end of the day, it is also changing the way in which you're thinking about collaboration. There is a tendency to say we will have A and B and C collaborate. Until A and B and C see something in it, at the end of the day, it will be a cosmetic collaboration. So how to find ways. There was a hand in...
Hi, my name is Wendy West, and one of your slides highlighted the gender inequality present in the challenges of food security. And I was wondering, how can we implement programs that highlight the importance of tackling food security as well as the issue of gender, and how that plays a role in the people that are affected by hunger?
Multifaceted question. Let me pick up on one of it, on one part of it, or rather 2 parts of it. There is definitely tremendous recognition now about the importance of gender in agriculture. However, it is oftentimes restricted to quote-unquote the gender community. So one major thing will be how to get it out of the gender community alone and get it into more broad mainstream economics world. Coming back to this, the key challenge will be how do you design programs that also recognize the time burden on women. I think that is what has hindered a number of the very interesting, innovative programs that are being designed and so forth, is there's a lot of pressure on the time of women. And until we are able to factor that in effectively, and 2, we are able to find ways to actually have not, women are not treated in isolation from men. Because men have to be effective partners also to see something out of this or to gain something out of it. Otherwise, it is also very difficult to sustain. And the empowerment across communities is also critical. You do see a lot of very, very interesting work happening, but you are beginning to see it stuck. And I think that is my worry, that it remains stuck in a quote-unquote gender community. And it has to be a gender plus community, and to get it out of the way. There is on February 28th, there will be something very interesting released at the UN Conference on the Status of Women that will also help us to see this forward. And now I said something that I shouldn't have said in public, because it's still embargoed stuff. I know there were hands also on this side. I don't know which way you want to have the mic go. Why don't you self-police the mic? Oh, God. Why don't you take Q and then we come back here, okay? Apologies. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Michelle. You did very briefly mention the unique nutritional challenges in developed countries, and in particular, the United States faces a problem with what's called food deserts, and you mentioned that high-calorie foods that have less nutrition is actually a cheaper option for a lot of people. And I'm wondering if there are different strategies for developed and developing countries when it comes to food security and providing that.
Different strategies, but I'm not the person to talk about developed countries because all the work we do is developing countries. But I would say 100% there are some common strategies, but a lot more different strategies also because the context of the problem. And that also makes me want to reinforce a point. So much of what I say is general. You must take it within the country or the community or the region context or cultural context also. We can think about it here, but at the end of the day, to be effective, you really need to be at the context in which, you need to have context specific. What is the word? Actions or policies and so forth. Having said that, there's a lot more learning two-way. Huh? There is a tendency to think we must learn, quote unquote, from the West. But I think you've found we have to go both ways because I've been hearing about it's been happening for quite some time now. The Grameen Bank model of Bangladesh is also being applied to some of the some of the states here also. So I mean, there's two-way learning. However, that is a long, waffly answer to which was essentially a non-answer to your question. Sorry about that. Let me come to you here. I know you'd be very patient.
I know we mentioned a little bit about science and technology, and I wanted to ask you about the role that you think that biotechnology and particularly biofortified foods would play in a sustainable solution for global food security.
Are different. Biotechnology and biofortified foods are different. The biofortified foods in Harvest Plus, which is this major program that is developing, doesn't always involve biotech techniques to do that. So just for a moment to keep that separate. Second is, from my own perspective, and I will probably alienate half of you right away, from my own perspective, biotech is an important potential solution, but not the only solution. And I think that given the scale of the problems that we face, and we're not talking of just a few people here and there going hungry, we're talking of the hundreds of millions, it behooves us to look at every solution we can. It may work in some contexts, it may not work in other contexts, it may not at the end of the day have an impact, but to categorically not even want to examine the viability of something I think is negligent. Let me go this side and then we work backwards. On the third row, yes, thank you.
When you mentioned China's case study and its success story, one of the features of that was a move back towards household farming, and like a major trend now in North America, but also I think in parts of the developing world, is a shift towards corporate farming, like large-scale farms. And I was wondering whether you think this can help achieve food security or whether it might be a detriment in terms of maybe reducing waste or improving efficiency, that kinds of things.
Question. Again, it picks up on the multiple solutions to food security. And large-scale farms also have a lot to offer, depending on the context and depending on how they come about. But for instance, Brazil's story is one of large-scale farms. Their small-scale farm would be an ultra-large-scale farm somewhere else. So one has to also take that context. And one also has to see that local, and I know we want to do local, but local is not always translatable into food and nutrition security for all. So one also may need, not for efficiency's sake, sometimes large-scale farms. So having said that, let me come back and parse it into two parts. If you want to tackle the food security of many ultra-poor and poor people, then small-scale farming is critical, how to make it more efficient and more viable. At the same time, one has to recognize that many of the poorest of the poor are not engaged in small-scale farming or any farming. They're landless. They are rural labor. One has to find ways to also address their needs. Then one also has to factor in that large-scale farms also have a lot to offer in terms of efficiency, in terms of value chain and in terms of lowering the price of food or so. And they may also offer employment opportunities. How you come up with that large-scale farm, what you see in many countries nowadays is what is quote-unquote called land grab. I don't like that term. It is seen as something coming from outside of the country. Excuse me, it doesn't come from outside of the country. There are many elites in the country who also do land grab. But if you are displacing people who do not have the tenure rights, but who use customary or other forms of tenure, and you're displacing them to quote-unquote build up a large farm for private, then that also has some social and cultural ramifications. So, one has to parse out these various pieces, and one also has to look at it within the context of where, when, how. So again, no clean answer, but the different facets to an issue. Yeah? Would you pass the mic along? Yes. Would feel like I'm coming as God here, John. These are just different sort of facets, aspects, and again, has always must be taken in context or brought down to the right context.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Esther. I have a question. We talked a lot about these long-term perspectives, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, and I don't know if you have experience related to this, but the issue of famines, which are more short-term, and how we respond to these emergency situations in terms of food security.
The one that we had most vivid in 2011 was the the crisis in the Horn of Africa. What is very interesting, one step back, is we're not seeing as many famines as we have seen in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, thank goodness, because I think we are learning from those. We are learning in terms of early warning systems. We are learning in terms of putting some preventive policies in place or diagnostics, etc. That doesn't mean famines have gone, as we just see in the Horn of Africa. I have a slightly different viewpoint from others on the Horn of Africa crisis. And you should also read the work of Rob Paulberg here. In fact, you should read all of Rob Paulberg's work. Truly, he is incredible in the way he is able to look at all the nuances. But Rob had a commentary out also on the Horn of Africa. My own take on the Horn of Africa, coming from Kenya, is that the famine in the Horn of Africa was not solely a drought issue. It was a governance issue. If we do not sort out the governance issues in the Horn of Africa, we will see continued crises there. And they're not driven by, quote unquote, just the weather, because we have, in other parts of the world, are coping with some weather. We're doing some better job in some parts and not so good jobs in other parts. But famines also, quote, are not short term. The consequences of famines are devastatingly long term, because you're displacing people, and you are displacing their assets, which is primarily livestock. As people sell off their livestock at low prices, basically bottom prices, to get back their income to purchase the livestock again is a major shock to them. The shock to people and their children who are displaced for years to come, frankly, and whose nutrition will be compromised, whose education will be compromised. Not that it was ever compromised, it was compromised already from where they were. So these are short-term events that, quote unquote, actually are long-term issues. Yeah. But to me, famines are more of a governance issue than they've ever been. You had, yes.
My name is Gina. And earlier in this program, we heard about microfinance from Smitha Radhakrishnan. And I was just wondering about your thoughts on the role of microfinance in agriculture, or how much outside funding is really needed to make changes that can be sustained. So those.
That's in agriculture, critical role. What you're finding in very many developing countries is that people do not have capacity to access finance, traditional finance through banks. Many banks are not willing to give agricultural finance because they don't see a quote-unquote profit out of it or viability or scale. So microfinance has a lot more opportunity, and frankly I think is a necessary instrument if you're really going to see sustainable. It doesn't come without risk. Nothing comes without risk, nothing. It is what type of policies do you put in place to manage the risk, both for the recipient and for the agency that is giving the microfinance, for them to be able to, quote unquote, get back also their returns and to remain sustainable. To me, an issue, so I believe we have to look for ways. Microfinance, microinsurance, microcredit. We're going to have to take these financial instruments into the micro level to be able to also help people manage risk. I reiterate the point I made earlier. Agriculture is a risky business. There is a reason why people will not adopt certain new technologies, because it is very risky. How do you help them to manage that risk? How do you help them to take insurance against that risk? And to smooth their risk over time a little bit. So different instruments are needed. The other issue that's going to come up is one level above microfinance. And again, this is not the large-scale farming, agricultural finance for the large-scale farming. It's going to be for the mid-level, to help to graduate out. Again, it's a challenge for those ventures to do that. So yeah, very, very big issue. Pass the mic behind you, yes. There was a lady in the blue and also you, whichever. I think it is a major source of income for many people. There can be many different forms of quote-unquote agriculture for export. It can be large-scale farms, it can be small-scale farms. It's how to effectively integrate these farms into the value chain and the export chain. But let me take a step back. Many small farms are not producing solely for own consumption. We have to move away from subsistence farming. We have to move away from that if you want to see increase in income. So where are the sources of incomes? To sell to what market? Sell to your local market, sell to the city market, sell to markets outside of the country. All avenues must be explored and exploited, frankly. You mentioned the land grab issue. That is a very different issue. You do have investment taking place of, say, China and Brazil, the soybean farms. I have not heard of major problems there, major problems, as you hear about in the African context, because I think they do have regulatory frameworks that allow, of course you will have problems. I'm not the first advocate of them, but one is to have what type of regulatory frameworks can you put into place to design these investments such that they're not displacing people, they're not using up more than their fair share of resources, particularly water. Water is going to be the biggest constraint in the future. And frankly, I see companies coming to invest in agriculture in other countries, not because of the farmland, because of the water resources they have. So you will see more and more of that issue. But again, pass that issue out or look at it in the different parts. Farmers are going to have to find viable sources of income. How do you help them do it in a way that is fair to them? Could you pass the mic back? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Julia. I was wondering if you could speak to agricultural practices that contribute to climate change and if there's a way of establishing more sustainable practices that both promote food security and the
I'm not the expert on climate change. I could sit here and pretend to be, but I will mislead you. There is work on that, including at my own institute. I would be happy to direct you to that work, where you'll get a more credible and proper answer. But it is a very important issue of how can agriculture adapt to and mitigate climate change. Yeah? Thank you. Kate, you're watching the time, huh? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going along the last line. I don't want to lose them. Just one moment, yeah.
Thank you. In one of your articles, you mentioned that value chain approaches can... Can you check to make sure the mic is working? Is it turned on?
Right.
It is mentioned that value chain approaches can be used to design and implement solutions to increase the availability, affordability, and quality of nutritious food. And I'm just wondering if you can explain a little bit more about value chain approaches, what they are, why they haven't been used in the past, and what their potential for changes are.
Approaches have been used in the past. So let me get that one out of the way in case I misspoke earlier. In the interest of time, I will also tell you that there's a very interesting paper up on the website where the 2020 conference took place, because that was one major element of that particular conference. 3 is then coming back to more of the specifics. The value chain essentially is basically going from the farmer all the way to the consumer, from farm to fork or plow to plate or however you call it, but goes from basically from the farmer to the processor to the retail chain, and the many, many players in between. I apologize, but there are many players in between. So the issue here is how do you essentially build nutrition into that value chain? How do you have incentives for farmers to produce foods that are more nutritious, either have more nutrient qualities to them, the biofortification aspect of it, for instance, and so forth. How do you find ways in the processing of the food that you're not removing the nutrients as much as you might have in normal processes? How do you find ways of packaging the food to retain the nutritional value? How do you find ways of transporting the food? How do you find ways of storing the food? So it is moving along that whole value chain. Do we have all the answers? No. This is one of the biggest areas of research that is coming up now, to look for ways. Not only there has been more work at the first part of the value chain, the production side. There has been much less work along the value chain. And there's a recognition now that we might want to look for ways either to enhance the value or to minimize the loss of nutrients as you go along that value chain. But seriously, I will encourage you to take a look at that paper, which will really be much more, in fact, terribly more crystal clear than I am. Yeah. There was a
Hi, my name is Anya. Thank you so much for your lecture. And what do you think are some ways that educators can effectively address nutritional and agricultural challenges in order to promote school attendance and design curriculums which are actually relevant to the needs of rural farming communities?
Wow, that is a loaded question. I was ready to answer the first part of your question, and then you added 3 more parts to it. Let me take the first part of your question, agriculture, nutrition, how educators. When we did the conference in Delhi, after that conference in Delhi, a university network has been set up coming out of London, but it involves about 8 or 10 universities in Africa, in the US, and Asia, basically to look for ways to rethink curricula. And how do you then find ways to have cross-sectoral or cross-disciplinary right there at the university level? The second and third part of your question went into the school feeding part, if I'm not mistaken. School feeding. So that is a completely different part. And what you're seeing over there is some very innovative work, for instance, coming out of World Food Programme on the Purchase for Progress, P4P as it's called. But basically a lot more school feeding of several types. One is where you're basically buying the foods from the local communities where the schools are. Then that way you're effectively supporting the agricultural development of that local community. Because what you find in many parts is farmers produce, but there are no markets. There are no markets. What do? You go back. You don't produce more, because if nobody's going to buy, it's a risk to you. So in school feeding programs that are drawing on the local resources are effectively also building up the agriculture. Another part is basically where you have the school feeding programs that are also redesigning the diets, and how then those are translated and taken back into the homes from the children that go back, and the indirect form of nutrition education that is taking place as children inform parents and so forth in terms of what to consume and how to consume. There's a lot. Your question has so many parts to it, I don't even think I've addressed even a layer of it. But there are many different aspects, all the way from how you design to how the way you implement programs. There were so many hands over here. Kate, do we still have time? Or? Let's do one more. Okay.
As a way to scale up investment, the importance of education and forums for voices. And I was wondering what you see as the role for communications technologies, especially cell phones or the internet, to improve food security and carry out those ways to scale up investment.
Caveat, tremendous role, because it helps basically to transmit information much faster without filters or middle agents, middlemen, etc. But you have to have accurate information, and you have to have it timely. But accuracy is much more important, and you have to have information with content, and people are able to translate that information or know how to use it. So technology is a means to an end. You have to correspondingly also invest in the content, the generation of the content, and also people's capacity to utilize that information, which doesn't take you away from the need of some form of education. It does not need to be a university education, but you also have to have some literacy or capacity and so forth. So take it in two parts. Yeah? I'm sorry I missed so many different hands over here. Catch me in the coffee break or at lunch or something. But I also thank you for giving me so many different questions. I did not do justice to them, but you made me think in different ways of some of these issues. So I also appreciate that. Thank you very much. Advertisement.